Hey everybody, welcome back to Record-ology. This is going to be fun. Audiobooks. So we have talked about weird record speeds in the past, like 16 and 2/3 RPM, and it always brings up the conversation of 8 RPM records that were used for books for the blind recordings, essentially giving people without the ability to see words to be able to hear them and enjoy a book. So the concept of an audiobook isn't particularly new. It dates back pretty much as far back as the history of recorded sound. However, specifically books on tape, meaning cassette tape, didn't really start thriving until the 1980s. I particularly remember my father very much into them, and he would make his time in the car productive by continually listening to audiobooks. He devoured knowledge. I asked him once, I said, "Dad, why do you read all the time?" Or why he's either reading or he's listening to audiobooks. I'm like, why are you consuming so much books? And he said, well, he asked his father, whom he greatly admired, what was his key to success, and his dad told him is to read, never stop reading. So he took that to heart, and I remember road trips where he would be listening to audiobooks, and he would consume so much information, and to this day is an absolute font of knowledge, as they say, completely happy to share all of the things he's learned. He's a very fascinating conversationalist. So by the late 90s, companies like Audible come along and really start to capitalize on MP3s, digital media players, ways to take 12-hour recordings and put them in a very small and portable space. And so now the freedom to move around and enjoy a book is opened up even more so. Beyond your car, beyond your home, you could be taking a jog, going for a hike, etc., traveling on an airplane, and be able to enjoy an audiobook. So it's really blossomed from its initial peak in the 80s to something even bigger now. And obviously now it's huge business, right? But I want to ratchet it back to the literal book on tape era. And I want to show you 3 of my favorite audiobooks. We're going to take a look at them, take a listen to them, and in the process, show off a couple of cool tape players as well. You're not going to want to miss this.
This is Record-ology.
I'm going to start by just showing you 3 of my favorite audiobooks, complete with their packaging, and then we're going to listen to them as well. Not the whole things. We're just going to sample them a couple of places so you can listen to it, and we're going to do that on 3 tape recorders, tape players that you haven't seen in quite a while on this channel. I want to start with this. This is The Civil War, read by Ken Burns. This is based off of a book that was based off of a documentary that the documentarian, is that a word? Ken Burns and his brother made, a famous PBS production. Guaranteed, if you go to your local thrift store, you are very likely to find a copy of this book. Well, back when I started really getting into the Civil War, when I was in junior high school, I had this fantastic teacher whom I'm still in contact with to this day. I think he is the only teacher that I've actually maintained contact with. We touch base every couple of years. Anyway, he got me really interested in Civil War. I don't remember where I picked this up. I think my dad used to go to Walden Books and places like that all the time. And I think I just picked this up because it said the Civil War on it, not really knowing about Ken Burns at the time, or even the fact that it was based on a TV series. And I remember mowing the lawn listening to this. And this isn't the exact copy. I had lost the original along the way as I, became disinterested in this and moved on to other things. Picked this up at a thrift store a couple of years ago, purely for nostalgic reasons. And it's the exact same thing. I mean, there's one key difference I'm going to show you, but basically this is exactly what a book on tape or a talking book or an audio book would look like in the late 80s, early 90s, about the size of a paperback book. It would have similar art, except it would say, sound editions. And this is a Random House production, as you can see there. It's a summary of what it's about. And this is two cassettes for $16. And the barcode you can see It's available in hard print, etc., etc. And then you would literally slide this tray out. Oops, I'm doing it upside down. And there would be cassettes. Now, there was different inserts. Some books only had one tape. This is a kid's book or like, something of poetry or something shorter. You may not need both cassettes. And what's cool is this insert allowed you to package this for just that. So you can see there's perforations in here. Okay, so that's the idea. And then it would insert like that, and then obviously could be expanded to accommodate both cassettes. So what the only thing that really differs between this exact copy and the copy I had was my insert. I don't remember it being red. I think mine was white. And the cassettes, I don't remember the red border. And that's about it. I think I had the cleared shell cassettes. Fun fact, the shells on cassettes, I don't know if it's the clear ones or the white ones only, but they're oftentimes made out of polystyrene, the same thing that a lot of 45s are made out of. These are Dolby recordings. They're well produced. There's no sound effects on this particular issue, but some audiobooks do have sound effects. Some of the Star Trek audiobooks are fantastic because they'll bring some of the actors from the shows and they'll really, add music, and it's almost like you're listening to a movie, and you guys know how much I like that. Anyway, I just have countless memories of, I don't know why, mowing the front yard of a particular house we lived in, and listening to this thing, and knowing me over and over and over again. I remember the narrator's voice. I remember the story. It was just a fantastic, fantastic thing. By the way, if you're interested in the American Civil War, this is a great resource. Fantastic. Ken Burns obviously has gone on to produce a number of documentaries on various subjects, everything from country music to jazz to baseball. And the Civil War, I think, was his first one. I think this was his first foray into this world. He also made a cameo appearance in one of my favorite movies, Gettysburg. And he plays an aide running up to General Meade's horse. So, yeah, I have a deep interest in the Civil War. I have for years and years. And this is something cool to have in the collection to pop in and listen to every once in a while. And like I said, I only have 3 audiobooks. Okay, this one I did not have as a kid. I wish I would have. I did not discover the Hardy Boys until I was in my 20s. And the rest has been history. Now I'm a collector of the books. I'm an avid reader of the stories. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. For my fellow Hardy Boys fans out there, this obviously is based on the revised text version of the first book, The Tower Treasure, the original being published in 1927, I believe, the revised version 1958. As you can see, this mirrors the cover art of this book right here. This is the Hardy Boys Flashlight Edition, as they call it. This design was used in the 80s and 90s. But anyway, yeah, so this is like a 3.5 hour read, and it's presented in audiobook form, read by Franklin Dixon. Franklin Dixon wasn't a real person. It was a fictitious author name used, and other authors wrote the real books. This is read by Bill Irwin. Now, they produced a handful of these because there's 58 books in the Hardy Boys book canon for this original series. Like I said, it's expanded to hundreds of titles in multiple universes now. But in the original, there was, nearly 60 stories. But they only produced like 4 or 5, maybe 6 of these audiobooks, which is such a bummer because they are fantastic. I think it has some sound effects and some music as well. It's very well produced. Bill Irwin's voice is great for this. You'll get to hear it in a few minutes here. This looks to be a library issue, which is kind of cool if you can pick up a library issue. This kind of looks like a VHS tape clamshell, but it's not. They're, rugged, they're well maintained, etc., etc. And instead of being in a cardboard sleeve, this is just in this plastic. I don't know if this is styrene as well. It's presented on what are definitely styrene tapes. These are white shell cassette tapes. Quality. One of the first things I do when assessing the quality of a cassette tape is gently squeeze the window. If it's a slip sheet, if the actual window itself is the slip sheet, it's typically a cheaper tape. But if it's a separate plastic window, that's a good indicator. Obviously, the color, the mixture, the darker, the better. This one is average. Dolby, and Dolby's important And you may be saying, really, for non-music tapes? Yes, absolutely, because oftentimes these are being read in a studio with no other audio. So if there's tape hiss, it comes through very, very clearly. It's not something you want. So yeah, this is super, super cool. This is a fun read. I've listened to a few of the Bill Irwin audiobooks, and this is a fun one to have for sure. So even though it does have, you know, a shorter time, it's unabridged, by the way. Unabridged meaning it's the full length. It's not shortened. Abridged would mean that it is shortened. So even though it's shortened, you may be saying, well, this is only 3.5 hours. It's much shorter than the other audiobook we were talking about, which is probably at least a 12-hour read. Well, how do they do that? This is going to be abridged, and this is going to be unabridged. So an abridged, longer book can fit on 2 cassettes, where a shorter book doesn't need to be abridged. So this is the full length. Plus, tapes can use different tape cuts, different lengths of the actual magnetic tape, etc., etc. So that is Tower Treasure. And we have this, which was a gift from one of you. Thank you so very much to the individual who sent this a couple of years ago. I'm listening to it sort of as a new tradition on Christmas Eve. Simon & Schuster Audio presents Patrick Stewart of Star Trek fame, Captain Picard, reading Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, performed on 2 cassettes. I love the presentation here. I love it. Similar plastic tray. This one is, instead of a sliding in and out of a tubular box, is just, you know, built into it. And you can see the white cassette, and this one, yep, Dolby symbol as well. So those will be Dolby B encoded. Typically, the inlay card, the J card for audiobooks is nothing to it, because all of the information that's pertinent to the recording is contained in the outer packaging of the box. This one has sort of a gatefold where you can read about it as well. And on the back, a summary and some reviews, etc., etc. Runtime, 110 minutes. And this was $16. Pricing is interesting. Kind of, you know, places the era. This one was $18, and this one, a little bit older, was $16. So there we go. We've got 3 audiobooks. And this, by the way, is great. This is he does such a good, as you can imagine. You know what I mean? This is the perfect person to read this story. It sounds so much like the way it should sound. It's hard when you get used to audiobooks and you kind of get spoiled. It's kind of hard to go back to reading again. It sounds terrible. I still read, but you know, there are times when I've enjoyed an audiobook and I'm like, dang, I just want to listen to it. I want to listen to the fully performed version with the little bells and whistles, and it's quicker to get through with an audiobook because these are professionally trained actors reading this stuff, voice talent. They can get through the books quicker because they can read at a more steady pace. There's no mistakes, there's no stops and starts, you know, unless you hit stop and start on the tape. But what I mean is that, you know, if you're like me, sometimes you have to reread something that doesn't make sense. Or if you do that thing like we always did in school where you start thinking about something else even while you're reading. And then you're like, what am I reading about? I don't even know what's happening anymore. That doesn't really happen with this. It's really good for the car, train trips, plane trips. Before we listen to these, I wanted to also talk about how these are made. So obviously, in a recording studio, although I guess apparently modern audiobooks are primarily recorded in the actors' home studios. They self-produce, and then the publishing company acts as an editor and a publisher. So these were probably studio recorded, I'm guessing, but if a particular actor does a lot of audiobooks, like Bill Irwin does a lot of different stuff, then he or she will likely have their own recording studio, and they are paid by finished minute. So if they, or finished hour, is it finished hour or finished minute? They're paid by the finished product. So if they spend 20 hours to make a 1 hour long recording, they get paid for the 1 hour long recording. And those rates can be anywhere from, you know, $150 to $400 an hour was an example that I heard. So it's not incredible money, but it's something to take into consideration. If these guys are cranking them out all day and all night, year round, then I'm sure they can make a pretty good living. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, we're going to start off with this. This is the Crosley C200. Is it the C200? CT200? Something like that. I love this design. This is a very, very cool sort of early 80s reminiscent design. And this unit, we've reviewed this, you know, in the past, is battery operated or AC power. There's an aux input. I believe that, no, it's headphone jack down there. It's Bluetooth enabled, but it really has all those old school features semi-auto stop. That's, when the tape's in play mode, it will stop automatically at the end. But if you're rewinding or fast forwarding, it doesn't stop automatically, just tugs on the tape. As with all of these, the off/tape position is where we have selected. We're going to go ahead and put the Civil War Red by Ken Burns. He's a great voice, so you'll enjoy this, I hope. And we'll just listen to a little bit, not a whole lot, but just enough to get the sense of it and, sort of maybe pique your interest in this title. So without further ado, here we go. The Civil War, read by Ken Burns.
Sherman replaced McPherson with General John Blackjack Logan, who reformed his men and ordered a massive counterassault, riding up and down the lines, crying, "McPherson and revenge, boys, McPherson and revenge." Hood was driven from the field in less than 30 minutes. At Ezra Church, west of the city, Hood tried and failed again to drive off Sherman's army. In little more than a week, a third of his force, 20,000 men, was gone, and he fell back into Atlanta. Behind their ramparts, the Confederates waited for Sherman to attack. "The Yankee gents can't get their men to charge our works," a Texan said, but Sherman saw no need to be so rash. He sealed off the city's supplies and waited. Federal guns began shelling the heavily fortified Confederate trenches and the city beyond.
So as you can hear, a machine like this is perfectly suited for this. I mean, you could just, put this by your armchair, make a cup of tea or your preferred beverage, and really just sit back and close your eyes and enjoy the story. So, okay, let's move on to the Hardy Boys. Now, I know we haven't had this on the show in quite a while. This is my little Victrola. Wouldn't call it a boombox, but it's a little portable cassette player with a single speaker. I guess the other one had a single speaker as well. This one has a few more features. It's got a TF card slot and a USB slot, obviously Bluetooth, so it's got the transport controls up there. But it works as a good, tape player as well. So we're going to go ahead and listen to some Hardy Boys on this little unit right here in glorious monaural sound.
The opposite side rose a jagged cliff. The little traveled road was winding and just wide enough for 2 cars to pass. "Boy, I'd hate to fall off the edge of this road," Frank remarked. "It's a 100-foot drop." "That's right," Joe agreed. "We'd sure be smashed to bits before we ever got to the bottom." Then he smiled. "Watch your step, Frank, or Dad's papers won't get delivered." Frank reached into his jacket pocket to be sure several important legal papers which he was to deliver for Mr. Hardy were still there. Relieved to find them, Frank chuckled and said, "After the help we gave Dad on his latest case, he ought to set in Bayport, a small but thriving city of 50,000 inhabitants located on Barmet Bay, 3 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean." The 2 motorcycles whipped along the narrow road that skirted the bay and led to Willowville, the brothers' destination. The boys took the next curve neatly and started up a long, steep slope. Here the road was a mere ribbon and badly in need of repair. "Once we get to the top of the hill, it won't be so rough," Frank remarked, as they jounced over the uneven surface. "Better road from there into Willowville." Just then, above the sharp putt-putt of their own motors, the 2 boys heard the roar of a car approaching from their rear at great speed. They took a moment to glance back. "Looks like the same guy we saw before," Joe burst out. "Good night!" At once, the Hardys stopped and pulled as close to the edge as they dared. Frank and Joe hopped off and stood poised to leap out of danger again if necessary. The car hurtled toward them like a shot. Just when it seemed as if it could not miss.
If you want to find out what happens, definitely check out The Tower Treasure. It's available where books are sold. Anyway, now we are moving on to our final sound sample, and that is Christmas Carol, read by Patrick Stewart, a.k.a. Captain Picard. And to do that, we are presenting the audio on this gorgeous 1980s Radio Shack TRS-80 computer cassette recorder. That's right, this was actually used as a tape drive on early Radio Shack computers. And this was a gift from a friend of mine. And it's just a rugged, kind of workhorse tape recorder. It's heavy. It's either battery or AC powered. I always go for AC powered if I have a choice. This is a true workhorse. So this pretty much is guaranteed to work every time I put a tape in it. And unlike the other 2 units, this is a vintage unit. It's also a shoebox recorder instead of being in the typical kind of boombox configuration. These are still being sold to this day under different names. We reviewed a bunch of them. And a shoebox is a very unsexy kind of tape recorder, tape player, but it's perfectly suited to lug around with a convenient built-in handle and use to play back books on tape, which is what we're here to do, right? So without further ado, here's Mr. Stewart, Sir Patrick Stewart, to read us some Christmas Carol.
But why? Why? Good afternoon. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon. Well, I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. His nephew left the room, but stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, my clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and they bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, said Scrooge. He died 7 years ago this very night. We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually...
So the question is, do you still listen to books on tape? Or just streaming? Or have you never listened to a book before? It's always weird after you've consumed a book via a book on tape or streaming, and you go to talk about it. I always find this moment where it's like, yeah, I read that book. No, I didn't read that. I listened to that book. It just still kind of sounds weird. But it's just a great way to consume a book. It really, really is. And I used to have quite a lengthy drive to work back in the day, and I listened to either podcasts or books on tape, books on digital, whatever, so very, very much. Curious about you. Do you listen to books? Do you think it's a good idea? Is this something that's going to be relevant for a long time going forward? Well, my friends, that's going to do it for today. Happy record hunting. We'll see you next time.